Welcome to part 2 of this mini-series where we're taking a closer look at each type of requirement that we write as a business analyst. In part 1, we talked about the user requirements, which are the user's expectations for interacting with the change, solution, system, or process. These requirements answer the question, what do the users want to do? If you haven't had a chance to see that video, click the link in the description below. Also, you'll find links to some other freebies that I encourage you to check out. So let's continue our deep dive into requirements by deconstructing the functional requirements, sometimes called system requirements. A functional requirement, as defined by the BA-BOK, is a capability that a solution must have in terms of behavior and information the solution will manage. The capability is the power or the potential to do something. And if we look closely at the word behavior, that is the actual action taken. So functional requirements tell us what the system or the solution must do to meet those users' expectations. Most often, these are observable actions that we can see when interacting with the system or the process. There are a few formats that we can use for functional requirements documentation. Let's take a look. The format for our functional requirements is going to be a little bit different because we want to focus on that the system is responsible for providing the requested capabilities or behaviors. And way back when I started, we only had waterfall. So I used individual statements for my functional requirements, starting with the system shall and then an action verb. I encourage you not to change the word shall to imply priority or just to make the reading more interesting, because these subtle changes of the system may or the system might or the system should can just really lead to confusion among your stakeholders. If you don't like the word shall, you can certainly pick another word. I encourage you just to be consistent. Reading through a functional requirement specification where all the statements start with the system shall does not make for super exciting reading, yet the consistency allowed my stakeholders to focus on those capabilities and the behaviors for the rest of the documentation. So again, think about how your stakeholders are going to be reading this, and we want them, as my first requirements trainer told me, a requirement should mean one and only one thing to each and every stakeholder. So keep that in mind as you write your requirements, whether they're user requirements or functional requirements, that we want to be clear, concise, and consistent across all of our requirement types. If you are following an agile approach, the functional requirements take the acceptance criteria format. Acceptance criteria are those criteria associated with requirements, products, or the delivery cycle that must be met in order to achieve stakeholder acceptance. The most basic format for acceptance criteria is rules-oriented or a checklist format, which is just simply a list that describes the behavior of the system. Test scenarios can be created from these rules or from this checklist item. A more advanced is the scenario format, where acceptance criteria is in the given, when, then format. And to keep this training simple, we're not going to talk about that today, but I just wanted to mention it. So a few examples, the individual statements starting with the system shall. In the first example, it says the system shall display filters. Again, is that an observable action that you possibly could see on a screen? The system shall provide the option to save filters. Can you see perhaps a save button or a pop-up on a window that says, do you want to save before continuing? Again, we're looking at observable actions of what the system must do, not how, but what. For the acceptance criteria, we're using the rules-based or a checklist. It's literally just a checklist of items. And as you are testing or going through the system, you can verify each of these items through those observable actions. Filter fields are displayed after selecting the productivity report. Imagine what that might look like on a screen. You've selected your report, and the filter fields, the way to filter the content, appears on the screen. Simple, short, concise, easy to understand for all of your stakeholders. In this short lesson, we talked about functional requirements, which the BA Bach defined as the capabilities and behaviors that the system must do to meet the user's expectations. Most often, functional requirements are observable actions. They answer the question of what should the system do. And we talked about the two most common formats. From my time in Waterfall, I use those individual statements starting with the system shall followed by an action verb. And secondly, if you're following Agile methodology, we have the acceptance criteria, which is either rules-based as a checklist or scenario-based with the given, when, then. Thank you for spending some time with me today. Remember, we are on a journey together, which I am honored to be sharing with you. We're going to keep taking it one step at a time. If you do me a favor, please leave a comment with one takeaway from this session down below, as well as any questions or ideas you have for upcoming videos. I want to deliver what you want to learn. So until next time, be curious, stay curious, and keep it simple.